All right, we're back. It is COMP1004, fall 2016 semester. It's week 8, part 3 of our broadcast, and we're doing a little bit of enrichment now. We've done the C# stuff with Windows Forms. This is rapid application development, but we're going to talk about a little bit of using another system with Visual Studio, Unity. So let's go into find Unity. If you go to unity3d.com, that's where you can get the actual game engine itself, right? And what I want to do is I want to say, click on Get Unity Now, right? There's different options. So you see Personal, Plus, Pro, and Enterprise. We've kind of covered this before. Our recommendation is you grab this free one. You don't want to pay $35 per seat per month, right? So let's just grab Download Now. And you can also download your installer. It installs things for Mac and Windows, right? It tells you the system requirements for Unity. Right now it's at 5.4.2, right? It was just released October 21st, right? Which is perfectly fine. Mine's gonna be slightly older than yours. Same capabilities, okay? Again, it tells you the graphics card you probably require, right? So DirectX 9 or DirectX 11, right? Most people's graphics cards would cover this now, okay? This is for people that somehow have a much older system that they want to install Unity on. So we download and we use the installer to download and install Unity, right? One thing to note with Unity is it'll ask you for, when I download the installer, I'm just going to do it for you guys so you can see it. On the Mac, right? And I'm going to put in the downloads here for a second. So this is the downloader for Unity, right? So here's my download assistant. You might have the same thing. This thing, it'll bring up my download assistant, right? And on the Mac, it'll tell me where to install my download assistant, and it asks me what stuff that I want to download. Like, for example, I'm just putting it out there for you guys. The Unity, object itself, which is 1.55 gigabytes. Okay, I'm telling you this for Gabe. This is for Gabe, just to make sure he has enough room, right, on his machine. Documentation for Unity, right, which you probably want. Standard assets. This is standard assets like first-person perspective. Example project, you can leave that off, right? Now, if you're going to build, these are build support for different systems, right? For example, if you want to build for Windows, you want to include this. So click that on, right? It may look a little different for you from a Windows perspective, right? Yes. Of course it would be, because I'm Mac and you're Windows. Yeah. Then you're going to, I also want you to choose WebGL. Right? So make sure you have WebGL build support and Windows build support. Those are the two things I want you to have. Yes? Say that again?
I have two different Windows things.
No problem. Let's go back, and I'll cancel this whole thing, just because. Go back, and we'll just cancel because I don't have to do it anyway, right? Let's do it on the Windows side, just for you. So I'm going to kind of close this down. Now, I have to caution you on the Windows side. I'm using a virtual machine. Running Unity in a virtual machine is not recommended, right? It just won't run properly. But let's suppose that I'm going to do it. Installation, just the first part. So again, I would go into unity3d.com, right? I'm going to go into Get Unity Now. I'm going to click on Personal, Download Now. It's going to download my installer. I'm going to kind of launch it. It's going to bring up this window for non-Mac users. I accept the terms of service, click Next, 64-bit, click Next. And now, this is the stuff. You do need this one, Unity 5.4.2, documentation, standard assets. Now, as we move down here, it says this is the stuff you're thinking of, Windows Store, and so on. You don't need this stuff. Well, in this case, because you're using Windows build, right? My recommendation is you grab both of those, right? And then WebGL, those two. Yes, That's why I'm telling you to do it now, because otherwise your Unity is going to be old, like it might be 5 point something or whatever it is, and it will be incompatible with some of the new things. So I recommend you update Unity. All right, now notice the installation size for here is 9.3 gig, right? It's not going to happen in 2 seconds, just FYI, right? So for today, because we're going to do an intro, I'd like you just to observe. The other thing that we also need is, I'm going to cancel my installation here, because I don't want to install it on the Windows side. I also want Blender, because we're going to use Blender. It's an open source tool set we can use for, again, doing some graphics. We're going to do that today. So we're going to grab Blender. So where you get that is from Blender, the Blender organization, so blender.org. Blender is a tool set. We can use Maya too, but just for people, for everyone to have access to the same stuff, I want to download Blender 2.7.8a. Mine's a little bit older, but that's fine. And you can certainly download for your system, Windows, Mac, or Linux, if you're a Linux person, which is pretty cool. That's why it's good. You can also look at the source code. I would recommend 64-bit, again, as an installer, right? And then once you've downloaded Blender, and notice it says Windows 10, 8, 7, and Vista compatible. Sorry, I'm shaking my head at Vista. But it is compatible. This is about, it's not as big. It's about 70 meg, something like that. So it's not as big as a package. I think it's 70, 80 meg, something like that. Even if it's 150 meg, it's not, it'll be very quick for you to download nowadays, theoretically. Once you've got Blender, and this is where we want to start. So for those people who are going to do this with me. Bring up Blender. Okay, so we need something to put into Unity. Unity is our game engine that we're going to do stuff with. We want to put something into Unity, we do it in Blender. Okay, yes? Yes, 3D Studio Max as well as Maya, if you like to use Maya, or other software. Even Rhino and other things can export. Even AutoCAD, if you really want to, can export to FBX. And then from there, you can import that into Unity. He's asking the questions. I'm just answering. Right? Just saying, if you really want to. I wouldn't do it, right? But if you really want to, you could. All right, so Blender is the way we're going to do it. One thing to note about Blender, it's all right-click, right? So one thing is, if you're following me, if you've downloaded Blender, I'm waiting for you guys to download Blender, by the way. So do it with me. Because Blender we can download in 2 seconds. Unity, it's going to take like half an hour, right, to get it all, because it's 9 gig, right? So when it comes to Blender, the great thing is you need a 3-button mouse. Okay, see the 3-button mouse? No 3-button mouse, you know what? You can't do anything with it. Okay, it's gonna be very difficult to do any kind of modeling without a 3-button mouse. Okay, so if you don't have your 3-button mouse here, next time when we do our Blender hour or our Unity hour, please bring your 3-button mouse. Okay, you need that. Why? Because I'm going to use the middle mouse button to do something like a roll, right? So I can roll around, the screen, or pan around, if you will. I can also use my middle mouse wheel that I have my object, right? So again, clicking on the middle, my scroll wheel, I'm clicking down on my scroll wheel while I'm moving my mouse around to do this. Okay, that's how I'm doing that. If I click down on my scroll wheel and I press my shift key, I can move it up and down or wherever I want, right? As opposed to panning around, I can just move the view, right? So that's one thing you'll be able to do. So navigation in a tool is very important. That's the first thing we want to do. The other thing to note is when we talk about 3D objects, because we're going to do Unity 3D, we're not going to do a 2D game, okay? Because it makes it a little easier. When we do 3D objects, one thing to also note is these arrows, right? I want you to think about these 3 arrows as the manipulator arms, if you will, right? So these 3 arrows represent the axis that we're going to translate our objects, okay? So the red arrow translates the object on the x-axis. So that's what it represents. So if you notice down here, it actually shows you what they are, right? So the y-axis obviously is the green arrow, and it kind of translates the object on the y-axis, right? And the blue arrow is the z-axis. Now, in this program, in Blender, we have Z up. Okay, that's the default. In other programs like Unity, Maya, and so on, we might have Y up. Just saying, right? Because of the way people look at things. For example, some people think that, and especially in math, right, that if I was going to look at an object like this, here's my X, and here's my X, and here's my Y. I'm just looking at it from way up here, right? That, you know, the Z goes in and out as opposed to up and down, right? Which is math, right? If you actually do any kind of vectors or anything like that, Z is always in and out of the orthographic view as opposed to up and down, right? Up and down is Y, right? And that's why a lot of programs have the Y-axis is up, okay? We can always change that, but for now, just leave it alone. So Z is up in Blender. So two peculiarities. One, to select an object that we see on the screen, you need to right-click. It's not left-click by default. You can change the defaults in your preferences, but my recommendation is leave it as is for now. Okay? Because lots of stuff can be changed if you change your preferences. The other thing is this: all objects that we do polygonal modeling. Okay, there's different kinds of modeling. There's NURBS modeling, surface modeling, all right, which is the old way, right? And then there's polygonal modeling, right? Polygonal modeling uses polygons that combine to make shapes, and we can use polygonal modeling to create a mesh that we're going to deform in order for us to create our objects. Okay, so we're going to deform our mesh. Example will be this cube, which is really boring, right? My cube is just sitting in the middle of my screen, and I want to deform it, right? So first of all, if I messed it up, if I moved it around somewhere and I want it to be in the exact center of my screen again, the easiest way to do it is to go to File, New, and then reload Startup File, and boom, it's back, right? If you messed it up. So File, New, and then reload Startup File. I'll do it again here. It's not going to hurt me if I do it again and again, right? Okay. In Blender, and actually in any kind of modeling software that you use, right? Blender, Maya, 3D Studio Max, whatever, right? Knowing the shortcut keys is key, right? Helps you out, and it creates a better, faster workflow, right? Than if you actually were to go through the menus. So there's a couple things that I also recommend when we do modeling, all right? We're not going to do a lot of modeling over the next 7 weeks, just a few things because this is the enrichment hour, okay? One thing I recommend is that you have a numeric keypad, all right? It's recommendations. It's not you need it, all right? Why? Because if you have a numeric keypad, there are shortcuts that happen on the numeric keypad that are not covered on the regular keypad or the keyboard, right? So if you're using a laptop, like most of you are right now, because we're in a BYOD kind of scenario, you need this, right? Or some kind of external little keyboard, right? You don't have to. Some laptops have an external key or a numpad on the side anyway, right? And some of them have function keys that you can use. You can do a function numpad somewhere on the laptop as well. Myself, I'm using a Mac, so without me having a little keyboard like this, separate keyboard, and you guys can't see it online. Let's see if I can just show you guys that. So if I go back to, for people who are watching me, this keyboard is what I'm talking about here for people who are watching me remotely, right? So I got a little keyboard, right? And this little keyboard is what I'm using on the Mac, because if I don't have this little puppy, then I cannot do my function keys like you would normally expect, okay? Go back to my screen view now. There we go. All right, so now that I've got my keyboard, and I'm back to Blender for a second, what I can do is, as soon as I have this up, if I press the 7 key, right, on the keyboard, right? So here's my keyboard is active. If I press my 7 key, right, it gives me the top view. So we shift from a perspective of what we're looking at to an orthographic view, right? Now, the one thing I want you to note is this is not the only way you can do this, okay? So if I go to View, inside the menu, you can see that I can always go to Top, right, numpad 7. And it tells you the shortcut key in here, sorry. It tells you the shortcut key right here. Also, right now, I'm still in perspective mode. It says top perspective. So that means I'm not truly orthographic. And orthographic means flat, like as if it's like a flat piece of paper. I'm looking at it with no perspective whatsoever, okay? So if I want to do that, I'm going to go to View, and I'm going to click on view, perspective, or ortho. It's a toggle. I toggle orthographic view or perspective view, on and off. That's the difference. See how flat that gets? The shortcut key for that one is the 5 button on your numpad. So if I go 5, I can go from ortho to perspective and back, right? Sorry, let's go back to top view, and then I can go from ortho to perspective. You can see the difference. The grid appears in perspective mode, and when I click ortho mode, it goes back with the grid is kind of muted. See that? That's with the 5 button, or if you go to view, again, perspective orthographic. Okay, good. So that's the 7 button. 7 does that. If I click the 1 button, it looks at the front view. If I look at the 3 button, it looks at the right view. And the reason why I want to sometimes model from those different sides is it's very difficult. I'm just going back to perspective mode to model from this perspective. Because if I'm thinking that it goes actually up, I might actually be pushing my mouse in, right? Which means I'll deform the object and it's not the way I think, because I'm not physically in that world. I'm not in a 3D world. It's an illusion. I'm seeing things in perspective because of my viewport, right? But actually, I'm looking at it from a 2D perspective. I'm in 2D. I'm seeing a flat screen. I'm not actually reaching in there with virtual reality or augmented reality and manipulating my cube, right? So because of that, I might be thinking it's going up when it's actually going in. And that's why we go and change views, change different perspectives, because it's easier for us to model from one side. Okay. Other things to note when it comes to 3D models, because we're just talking about 3D models for a second, right? And kind of a really high-level overview today, right? When it comes to 3D models, they have 3 properties. All 3D polygonal models we're going to use when we do polygonal modeling, right, have 3 properties. Vertices, they have 3 things. Vertices, edges, and faces. All models, whether it's a sphere or something else, they have those 3 things. Now, we're not talking about NURBS models. NURBS modeling is a totally thing. That's surface modeling. We're talking about this modeling, which is mesh modeling, right? And if you notice, if I want to add a new model, right, a new a primitive, if you will, that's what these are called. This is a cube primitive, right? And if I want to add something else, I can go to mesh, right? And I can add other things like planes or circles or a sphere of some kind or a cylinder or a cone or whatever I want, right? There's also the different way of modeling, which is surface modeling, which is the NURBS way of modeling. We're not going to do it that way. We're not touching this in this course, right? Because we don't have time. We're using mesh modeling, or polygonal modeling is what it's called, right? So all polygon models or polygonal modeling techniques we're going to use are going to be using things like vertices, which is the points that all the edges kind of meet, right? The vertices, the edges, and the faces of each of the models. So when we know that, if I can go into different kinds of selection modes. Now in Unity, in Maya, if you're using Autodesk Maya, right? It's simple as right-clicking and picking what kind of selection you want to do. Here, you actually have to switch modes. So in order for me to do any kind of changing to my model, right now it's in object mode. I can only look at it. I can't really do any modifications in object mode. In order for me to do any modifications to my model, I need to go into edit mode. And for me to do that, I need to click the tab button. So click the tab button with me. Now, if you notice, if I click the tab button, my model lights up, and it looks like it's fully selected. Okay? For me to deselect all or select all, it's the A button. So if I click the A button, I deselect all. Now everything is deselected in my model, right? I'm in edit mode, and if you notice, here's the actual key you can use to go from edit mode to object mode. There's a difference. If you look at edit mode, you can see that the lines become more crisp, right? In edit mode. Also, of course, you have this that tells you you're in edit mode. Okay, so that's the only place that I can do any kind of editing, in edit mode. Well, this is nice. Let's select all. So press the A button to select all again. And what I want to do is I want to chop this up a little bit, right? Because, you know, it's only a cube, right? So let's go into here, and let's go, when I scroll down on the left-hand side here, this is the toolbar, right? If I scroll down, you'll see there's a button here that says subdivide. Click that. And I only want to do it once, so subdivide once. Okay, now if I click the A button to deselect all, now you have my cube, but it has some divisions, right? Now, by default, it's in vertex mode. So if I right-click on a vertex like this, you can see now that I can click on the point that's on the corner, right? And if I use my manipulator arms on the point to pull it around, I can deform my object, right? By pulling on the manipulator arm, right? To make the object look like anything I want. Even some kind of weird cube. Now notice on the in perspective mode, I can't really see the deformity as much. But if I was to shift to, top view, you can see that something's not right, right? Although you can see how much of it's gone into, I've kind of pulled it into the middle of my object here. So here's my cube, and this corner I've kind of deformed it so it's inside the middle of it, like inside, right? By top view. If I go to the front view, it looks like this. So what I think is actually happening, I can't tell from top view that this is actually raised as well, right? If I go to the side view, it looks like this. And that's why we use different views to model, because we have more control, right? Otherwise, when it comes to modeling stuff, it can take us forever, right? Because we think it's something's happening when we're looking at things, but actually what's happening is something totally different. All right, let's go back into perspective mode, right? So you can see what we've got. This is our cube. And if I go back into object mode from edit mode, you can see that now this is what my object will look like. I've deformed my object. It's no longer just a cube. It's some kind of polygonal object, right? Guys and girls, I'll tell you right now, the way we do modeling is we work with primitives. We start off with primitive objects, and we modify the primitive object to do whatever, to make it look like whatever we want, right? A lot of times. So we can start with the monkey too, but that's just a lot of work. So then we have to get rid of it. So this is what the edit mode would look like. So I'm going to go back into edit mode. Here we go. And now I can select multiple vertices, right, by shift right clicking. So shift right click, shift right click. Now I've selected these 3 vertices, and now I can deform all of them at the same time, right? You can deform all these vertices, even skew it to the right or to the left. I can even go so far as to push it into the cube, right? So deform it so that it goes in, if I really want to, which is kind of weird. Okay, so very simple, ways of deforming things. That's the way we use vertices. Vertices gives us a lot of control, but sometimes we want to do things like with edges, and we'll talk about that a little later. First, before we go into edges, I want to do faces. So I want to switch between vertex select mode and face select mode. And the way we do that is on the bottom here, you can see there's some buttons. One of them is this face, right? And then you get these little dots like this, right? The other quick hit to do that, or a shortcut, is if you press Control-Tab. If you put Control-Tab, it'll give a little context menu that comes up where you can switch from vertex select mode to face select mode to edge select mode, whatever you want. Now that you've got your face select mode on, I can right-click to select my face now, not just my vertex, and I can, again, deform my object by the face of the object, right? So I can skew my object in and out just from the whole face itself. Less control because I'm also moving all the vertices and the edges, right? But sometimes what we want to do is want to select the face to move it around. Control-Tab, if you press Control-Tab, it'll bring up the different kind of selection modes. This only works in edit mode, not in object mode. Okay, Control-Tab. Questions so far? Because we're running out of time. So again, very, very fast. What I want you to do for next week is, to make this more productive, is have Unity downloaded, right? And have Blender, download Blender, take a look at the video that we just made together, right? Fool around with the models a little bit. Because you can do the same thing. If I want to add in, before I let you go, if I want to add in another model, right? For example, I've got this one, but I want to add in a sphere. I can go Shift-A for adding in a sphere. So it takes me to mesh mode. I want to look at, let's say, an icosphere, right? Which is kind of like a polygonal sphere. It's a very rough kind of sphere. Notice on the left, you can also modify what you add in by adding additional subdivisions, right? Which is kind of cool, right? So that's neat. There's my icosphere. And again, if I was going to go into edit mode, now I have a lot more points that I can go into to modify, right? So I can kind of go in here and then, you know, modify my sphere by doing the same things I did last time, by selecting, an example would be faces, right? Or selecting vertices by Control Tab. You know, here's my vertices. I want to select this vertex right here, these 3 vertices. So this one, maybe this one, and this one. Again, it can be quite fun to do this kind of stuff for people who are interested, right? And so you can make whatever shape you want with primitives. That's what I want. That's what I want you to get from all this, right? So you can imagine if I'm making a full 3D game, what the work I have to do, right? I can't just, it's not just, you know, drag and drop necessarily. Yeah. How? Oh, yes, and Blender uses Python. So yes, you could use Formuli to do it for sure. But you wouldn't want to do that here. Okay, so now that I've got these objects, right? Let's say I want to, and this is the last thing I want to show you before we stop. So I've got this object. I don't like this one, but I like this one. It's a kind of weird looking object, whatever. And I want to bring this into Unity, all right? So first of all, let's kill this one. So I'm going to right click and click X to delete, right? And now I have this one. I want to export this object. So I'm going to say File, Export, oops, File, Export. And if you notice, there's different options for exporting. I want to choose, I can choose FBX, or the one good thing about Blender is it actually imports the whole file directly. It'll actually, Unity will take a Blender file, like with no exporting or anything. And the way to do that is just save the file. So File, Save, and we'll call this, we'll put this Blender model, we'll say it is, I don't know, sphere. We'll call it spheroid. That's what this object is. It's not really quite a sphere. Right? Make sure there's a dot there for spheroid.blend. The blend extension is for Blender. Save it. And once I've saved my Blender model, there's nothing that stops me from going into Unity. So we'll go into Unity for a second. Right? And then you don't have to remember how to do this because we'll do it all again next week. But if I go into Unity, if I click on a new Unity project, which is what we're going to do, this is how you when you open Unity, this is what it looks like, right? So I want to create a new 3D Unity project. We're going to call this COMP1004 F2016 lesson 8, so we can differentiate. And it's going to go on a Unity project on my desktop. That's where I put it. Create project. What Unity will do is create a default scene. This is the default scene for the project. We're gonna talk about layouts next week. But notice that there's no objects in the scene. So the scene is, there's a bunch of tabs here. One is the scene tab that shows you all the objects in the scene. There's nothing in the scene. And then there's the game tab for what it looks like. I want to drag and drop my Blender file in here to show you what it looks like. So let's see if we can do that. So I'm going to go to Downloads. Here's my spheroid.blend. Drag and drop it into the Assets folder. And what it does is it imports it and converts it. We'll talk about different folders. And then I can just drag and drop my spheroid into Unity, and then there we have it. Right? One thing to note before I let you go, right? We don't do any modeling typically in Unity at all. There's no modeling. You can do a modeling if you download plugins for Unity, right? But we don't. Typically what we do is we do modeling in another software. That's the pipeline that we're talking about here. So the game development pipeline, we develop it with Maya or 3D Studio Max or Blender or something else. Then we bring those models into Unity just like we just did. And then we can script the model so it moves and so it has functionality. And that's the C# part that we're going to be dealing with starting next week. Questions around this? So homework for you guys. 1, please have Unity installed, right? And with the things I've asked you to do. Please have Blender installed. We're going to do some small things with Blender as we go forward. I can't do the entire hour with Blender because we don't have time. And it's just enrichment for you guys. I want to get stuff moving on the screen right now, right? And it's just set up this week, okay? So have those 2 things kind of set up for now. And then when we come back next week, everything was ready. Test your your installation so we can actually play around with this kind of stuff. Okay, and that's it for me for today. I'll see you guys next week. Remember, next week you're going to get assignment 4, and I'll be expecting assignment 3 to be completed.